Okay, so the question was, when interviewing a client, do you encourage recording the interviews or do you discourage that? I'm going to ask you a follow-up question. For what purpose would you be recording the interview? I've never recorded an interview for a client, and I've had probably about 300 direct service clients plus all our Safe Passage clients. It's not something that I do because I don't know how I would explain that to my client, that why I was recording them. Yeah, I mean,
the recording would be discoverable.
Yeah.
Potentially.
Thanks, Lenny. That's why I have a law professor. Yeah.
Privilege, but if there's someone else in the room, I don't think you want to record.
Yeah. I take notes. I like my handwriting, so I take notes on a loose leaf pad. Yay. And I explain to my client why I'm actually taking notes because, you know, while my memory is pretty good, I want to make sure that I understand when I'm looking back tomorrow everything that he or she said. Okay. Hi. Yeah, Meg.
Particularly for younger children,
Yeah.
are there any children's books that kind of describe what goes on in this process? Do you recommend bringing toys or having them draw pictures?
Yeah, great. So the question was, particularly for younger children, are there any books that describe this process, or do you recommend toys, drawing pictures, so on and so forth? Okay, so I'm going to back it up a little bit. Pictures, definitely. The idea of drawing is fabulous. That was in my notes, and I apologize that I didn't actually address it, but the idea of for a young person, we've asked many children to draw where they live, right? And then to explain that drawing to us, right? So it's not just the kid draws a picture, the kid then explains to you what's in that picture, right? And so I clearly remember a child drawing a picture, and it was of the house, which was adorable, right? And there were these bars over the window. So the kid was describing, and we're asking why these bars are over the window. And then it all came out of how dangerous the neighborhood is and how everybody was murdered, and the whole story came out with looking at that picture and describing that picture with the client. So yes, I would definitely, definitely drawing pictures. In terms of books, that would be great.
Yeah.
That's a great idea. Yeah.
Work with us. We can script it tomorrow. We just need some artists.
Yeah, that would be awesome. I would love that, and that's amazing.
We do have a comic book, and we have been working on a comic book about explaining the lawyer, working with a lawyer, but we haven't thought about a comic book of the whole journey. We have another one that's like the game of life, where all the various stops of the legal process along the way, but to be really honest, I was doing that for you guys. And it got so complicated, I thought, no one will play with me.
Yeah, so we love that. Yeah, go ahead.
And then just related to that,
Yeah.
So when we're interviewing these kids, do we have any obligation? Let's say they're telling us about all these horrible things that happened to us, but then they're telling us, what if they start telling us that somebody currently is abusing them or currently doing something bad to them? What are our obligations then?
Okay, so the question, I'm just going to take the last part of the question. If the child that you're interviewing is disclosing current abuse going on, things like that, what are your obligations? As lawyers, you are not mandatory reporters, meaning you are not required as a lawyer licensed in New York State, hearing this in New York State, to call ACS, essentially to call protective services to report that. I'm going to actually turn it over to Lenny to talk more about that because we have kind of a situation. It's,
I actually have Professor Baum sitting next to me.
Yes.
He's found out St. John's. So
Great.
Correct me if I'm wrong. Okay, this is a very complicated issue. You are the attorney for the child. I'm not on. You're the attorney for the child, and the child articulates to you some present harm. I want people to think for just a moment, first of all, how competent are you as an attorney to understand the context of what the child's saying to you? And, I'm not saying that you ignore that child. I just want you to be sure that you understood what you were hearing. Second, we have a concern that if the child's first meeting you for the very first time, and the first thing that you do is say to the child, don't worry, things that you tell me I'm going to keep secret, but now that you've told me that your house is dangerous, I'm going to call some people who are going to come down and investigate your house. The child won't understand the relationship with the lawyer versus you just said you weren't going to tell and now you're telling. And that doesn't mean you're going to leave that child victimized or alone. So What we have done in some other situations is we have consulted with social workers, we've evaluated the community they live in, we've done some background research about possible organizations we could refer the child to. We want to know how seriously might that community take this statement of the child. I'm sorry this gets so complicated, but in some counties, they will not be named at the moment. One of them is one where I live. They are not as compassionate about these immigrant children. And so there might be a cursory investigation triggering the abuser being angry at the child and nothing done to protect the child. So before you as a lawyer say, oh, I've got to help this child, I'm going to call this protective services organization, you need to know what that protective services organization is going to do to help that child. And it may be there's another way to help the child. I would definitely say I'm willing to take on this crazy world and try to help you. And we do have a couple of cases right now where we're doing very careful fact assessment and investigation before we go forward, because we want the child, we don't want to put the child in more danger by being just, let me get it off my desk and onto the desk of government when maybe government isn't prepared. I would say here in New York City, we have good relationships with several social work organizations. We have had social workers meet with some teens, and those children have voluntarily put themselves into foster care, and they were able to do that because of their age, and they were being more abused as an adult. They weren't a younger child. They were being forced to work, not being allowed to go to school, living in a violent situation, and they were able to get themselves enrolled in foster care. But when you have a very little child, it's a more complex situation. So let me just say, Professor Baum, how did I do in my answer?
That's perfect. So I just want to add two things. One is, I was going to mention before that for these reasons, instead of describing your conversation as secret with the child, we usually describe the conversation as private, but with two possible exceptions. One being the child giving us permission to repeat what they say, and the other is being if the child tells us something that means either the child or someone else that the child knows is in serious immediate harm, then we might tell someone else. And don't forget that for the lawyers in the room, the rules of professional conduct still apply to you, Part 1200, and the rules do not require you to keep confidential information which could lead to the child harming herself or someone else being harmed. You're allowed to break confidentiality in those circumstances, and there might be a number of circumstances in which you might want to do that.
Sure. Right. I agree with you. Just for the record, I think it was picked up by the tape, but ethically we are allowed to release that information if we believe the child is in harm. Just one other thing, we've asked the court about this. We've also talked to other SIDS providers and also the asylum office. The asylum office will also interview the child about their situation, and they used a phrase such as this: if we think the child is not having the life of the typical American child, breakfast, going to school, clean clothes, a safe place to sleep. I don't know which America they're living in, but okay. So many of us live in poverty. You know, it's a country we're not, as we say, we could do better with our own children. But then we will report it where? They said we will report.
Right.
And their report to ICE. And their philosophy about why they go to ICE is they're all part of the Department of Homeland Security, and they say ICE is the only department within DHS that has the ability to pick people up and transfer them back into the custody of ORR. So I was not very happy with that answer. I think that one day we should get the asylum office, if they're going to do that, to understand that who they should call, if they think they have to call, is Child Protective Services in their state, not to put someone back into ICE custody. The court said the same thing. They have no resources. If a child's been released by the Office of Refugee Resettlement, which is a misnomer, it just happens to be the name of the detention unit within the federal government that houses these children, and a child's not in a safe situation, they've said they will call the ICE officer to contact ORR to take the child back into ORR custody. I don't know that that's an ideal situation. for some of the children. But on the other hand, we don't want any child to be harmed, right? So if you are doing one of these pro bono cases and you have a suspicion or a concern, I would say physical abuse has been a little less rare, but I've certainly talked to a lot of kids who really have no choice but to work long, long hours every evening because they have to help pay the rent. And that's what they have to do as a condition of staying in their uncle's house. And we have talked to those children about, do they want to leave that house? And they don't. But that's the reality of that family. And probably some of us would say that's on the border of neglect under New York law if the child's not getting enough rest and sleep and able to perform in school. But it's a rock and a hard place situation.